Don't forget to like the video, share your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe to stay updated with our latest stories. It all started on a Tuesday, I remember, because Tuesdays were usually my quietest day. Mark, my husband, would be at the office, lost in his engineering blueprints, and I'd have the house to myself. For 20-odd years, that had been the rhythm of our lives. Comfortable, predictable, and if I'm being truly honest with myself, maybe just a little too quiet some days. I'm Sarah, by the way, and I guess you could say I was content. Or at least I thought I was. We had a nice home in a leafy suburb. Our two kids were grown and flown, making their own ways in the world. Mark was a good man, steady and kind, though perhaps not the most talkative, especially after a long day trying to make bridges stand up. Our evenings usually consisted of dinner, a bit of television, and then early to bed. Not exactly fireworks, but a gentle, flickering candle that I'd learned to appreciate. That particular Tuesday, the phone rang just as I was about to water my wilting hydrangeas. It was Mark, which was unusual for him to call midday. "Everything all right?" I asked, a little knot of worry tightening in my stomach. Mark wasn't one for surprises. "Everything's fine, Sarah, fine," he said, though his voice had an edge I couldn't quite place. "Listen, something's come up. Mr. Harrison, my boss, he wants to meet you." I nearly dropped the watering can. "Meet me? Arthur Harrison? What on earth for?" Arthur Harrison was a bit of a legend in Mark's company, a formidable figure who'd built his engineering empire from the ground up. I'd seen him at a few company dinners over the years, always impeccably dressed, a man of few words but immense presence. He was polite, of course, but distant. Definitely not the sort of man I imagined would request a meeting with the wife of one of his senior engineers. "I'm not entirely sure, love," Mark continued, sounding just as puzzled. He was a bit vague. Said it was a personal matter he wanted to discuss. "With you, specifically. He's invited us both for dinner at his home on Friday." At his home? Not some stuffy office, but his personal residence. This was getting stranger by the minute. My mind raced. Had Mark done something wrong? Was this some sort of elaborate way of letting him go? No, Mark is too good at his job for that. Mr. Harrison had always valued him. Did he seem annoyed? Or anything? I pressed. No, not at all. Actually, he seemed rather thoughtful. Almost gentle, if you can imagine that from him, Mark said. He just said it was important and he'd appreciate it if we could make it. Gentle? Arthur Harrison? The man who could make grown engineers quake with a raised eyebrow? This was a new one. My hydrangeas were forgotten, their plight suddenly insignificant. "Well, of course we'll go," I said, trying to sound calmer than I felt. "Friday, you say? What should I wear?" What does one wear to the home of Arthur Harrison on a personal matter? Mark chuckled, the tension in his voice easing a little. "Just be yourself, Sarah. That's always more than enough." Easy for him to say. For the next 3 days, I was a bundle of nerves and speculation. I must have tried on half my wardrobe, discarding outfits for being too casual, too formal, too fussy, too plain. What kind of personal matter could he possibly want to discuss with me? I hardly knew the man. I replayed our brief past encounters in my mind. A polite handshake here, a shared smile over a canopy there. Nothing that warranted a private dinner invitation. The not knowing was the worst part, a little seed of anxiety blossoming in my chest. Mark, bless him, tried to reassure me, but even he was clearly intrigued and a little on edge himself. He kept saying Mr. Harrison had been different lately, quieter, more reflective since his wife, Eleanor, had passed away the previous year. A deep sadness had clung to him at the last company event, visible even beneath his stoic exterior. Perhaps this had something to do with her. Friday evening arrived cloaked in a soft, late spring drizzle. Mr. Harrison lived in an older part of the city, a neighborhood filled with grand, stone-built houses set back from the road behind ancient trees. His home was impressive, no doubt, but it didn't feel ostentatious. It had a settled, dignified air about it, much like the man himself, I supposed. As Mark rang the bell, I smoothed down my silk blouse for the 10th time, taking a deep breath. The door was opened not by a housekeeper, as I might have expected, but by Arthur Harrison himself. He was dressed in a simple cashmere sweater and dark trousers, looking less like the CEO of a major firm and more like a kindly grandfather. His smile was surprisingly warm. His eyes, though carrying a lingering trace of sorrow, were clear and direct. "Mark, Sarah, please come in." "Thank you so much for coming," he said, his voice softer than I remembered it from the formal settings. The house was beautiful inside, filled with art and books, comfortable furniture, and the scent of old wood and beeswax. It felt like a home, not a showpiece. There was a quiet elegance to it, a sense of lives well lived within its walls. He led us into a cozy sitting room where a fire crackled merrily in the hearth, warding off the evening chill. "Please sit down. Can I get you something to drink?
Wine?
Or perhaps something softer?" We settled with small glasses of a crisp white wine, and for a few minutes, the conversation was light, general pleasantries about the weather, Mark's latest project. But the unspoken question of why I was there hung in the air, almost palpable. Mr. Harrison seemed to sense my slight unease. He set down his own glass and looked at me, his expression earnest. "Sarah," he began, his voice gentle, as Mark had described. "I imagine you're wondering why I've asked you here tonight, specifically asking to speak with you." I managed a small, polite smile. "The thought had crossed my mind, Mr. Harrison." "Please call me Arthur," he said. "And Mark, you too. When we're not in the office, it's Arthur." He paused, gathering his thoughts. The firelight flickered across his face, highlighting the lines etched by time and, I suspected, recent grief. "As you know," he continued, his gaze dropping to his hands for a moment, "I lost my dear Eleanor last spring. It's been a significant adjustment." Mark and I murmured our condolences again. Eleanor Harrison had been a quiet, graceful woman, often involved in charitable work. I'd liked her, though I hadn't known her well. Arthur nodded, a faint, sad smile touching his lips. She was the heart of this home, the heart of my life. She had so many passions, so many things she cared about deeply. One of her greatest loves was literature, and this house, particularly her library, is filled with her spirit. He gestured vaguely towards another part of the house. She was also a writer herself, not for publication mostly. Journals, observations, half-finished stories, poems. She poured so much of herself onto paper. He paused again, and the silence in the room was thick with unspoken emotion. I found myself leaning forward, my earlier nervousness replaced by a growing sense of empathy. "After she passed," Arthur said, his voice a little hoarse, "I found it difficult to engage with her things. Her clothes, her personal effects, especially her library and her writings. It felt too raw, too final. But recently, I've realized that I can't just leave it all locked away. It's not what she would have wanted. Her words, her thoughts, they deserve to breathe. They deserve to be seen, perhaps in some way." He looked directly at me then, his eyes holding a curious mixture of hope and vulnerability. Mark has often spoken of you, Sarah. He's mentioned your love for books, your thoughtful nature, your way with words. He once told me about a local reading group you run, how you bring stories to life for people. I was taken aback. Mark had mentioned my little book club. I'd always thought he barely registered its existence, just another of my quiet hobbies. A flush crept up my neck. Arthur continued, I'm not sure what to do with Eleanor's collection, with her writings. I'm not a literary man myself, not in that way. I wouldn't know where to begin, how to honor her memory properly through them. It feels like a monumental task, and one that requires a sensitivity, an intuition that I fear I lack in this domain. He took a slow breath, and then he laid out the offer, the words that would slowly, surely, begin to change the quiet, predictable rhythm of my life. Sarah, he said, his voice steady but filled with a plea. I was wondering if you might consider helping me to go through Eleanor's library, her papers, to help me understand what's there, to perhaps curate it, to advise me on what should be done. It's a deeply personal request, I know, and perhaps an unusual one. But I find myself in need of a gentle hand and a discerning eye. I would, of course, compensate you for your time. This wouldn't be just a favor, it would be a significant undertaking. I sat there, speechless. Mark looked as surprised as I felt, though there was a flicker of something else in his eyes too. Pride, perhaps? The aroma of the old books I'd sensed earlier seemed to drift into the room, mingling with the wood smoke. Helping Arthur Harrison sort through his late wife's literary legacy. It wasn't a job offer in the traditional sense. It was something far more intimate, more personal. An invitation into a place of grief, memory, and unspoken stories, my mind, which had been buzzing with anxious what-ifs, suddenly went very still. This wasn't about corporate maneuvering or hidden agendas. This was about a man, a grieving husband, reaching out for help in the most vulnerable way. He wasn't just offering me a task, he was offering a piece of his heart, a glimpse into the life he had shared with Eleanor, the quietness of my Tuesdays, the predictability I had both cherished and sometimes chafed against, suddenly seemed vast and empty, a blank page waiting for an unexpected story. And this, I sensed, was the first line that I looked at Arthur, truly looked at him, perhaps for the first time. I saw not just the powerful CEO, but a man carrying a heavy weight, a man who missed his wife dearly and wanted to honor her in the best way he knew how, even if he didn't know how. There was a sincerity in his request that resonated deep within me, stirring something I hadn't realized was dormant. It was an appeal not to an employee's wife, but to another human being. Arthur, I said, my voice a little shaky but clear. I don't know what to say. It's a very generous and trusting offer. He gave a small, hopeful smile. Take your time to think about it, Sarah. Please. There's no pressure. Discuss it with Mark. It would involve spending a fair bit of time here, in Eleanor's spaces. It might be emotionally taxing for you as well. Emotionally taxing, yes. But also, perhaps, incredibly meaningful. The thought of sifting through someone's cherished books, their private writings, felt like a sacred trust. It was daunting, but a part of me, a part that had been quiet for too long, felt a flicker of excitement, a sense of purpose I hadn't anticipated feeling ever again. Mark reached over and gently squeezed my hand. It's quite something, Arthur, he said, his voice thoughtful. She's very good with these things. Very intuitive. I felt a warmth spread through me at his quiet endorsement. He saw it too, The potential for this to be something more than just a project. Arthur's gaze was still on me. I just felt, I had a sense you would understand, Sarah, that you would approach it with the respect and care it deserves. Dinner was a quiet affair, though not strained. We talked more about Eleanor, about her love for gardening, her quiet humor. Arthur shared a few anecdotes, his sadness tinged with a gentle fondness. It felt as if he was slowly opening a door that had been closed for a long time, letting a little light and air into a shuttered room. As we drove home later that evening, the drizzle had stopped, and the city lights seemed to gleam a little brighter. Mark was quiet for a while. Then he said, "Well, that was unexpected." Understatement of the year. I replied, my mind still trying to process the offer. Her library, her writings, he trusts you, Sarah. I could see it in his eyes. He trusts you a great deal. Mark paused. What do you think? I looked out at the passing streets, at the houses with their lights glowing, each one holding its own stories, its own quiet dramas. My own story, I realized, had just taken a very unexpected turn. I think, I said slowly, a sense of calm settling over me, replacing the earlier anxiety. I think I might have to say yes. It wasn't just about helping Arthur or even about the books. It was a feeling, a pull towards something new, something that felt important. A chance to step out of the comfortable quiet and into a space filled with echoes of a life lived passionately. A chance to perhaps rediscover parts of myself I'd forgotten were there. The prospect was a little scary, yes, but it was also exhilarating. I had no idea then just how much that one unexpected offer, made in a quiet sitting room on a drizzly Friday night, would truly change everything, not just for me, but for Mark and Arthur as well, weaving our lives together in ways none of us could have ever predicted. The quiet routine of my life was about to be rewritten. The following days were a whirlwind of internal debate, though, if I'm honest, my heart had made its decision in Arthur's sitting room. The practicalities were what I wrestled with. Could I truly commit the time? It sounded like a significant undertaking. Eleanor's library, Arthur had hinted, was extensive, and her personal writings could amount to boxes. How would it affect my life with Mark, our established routines? We talked about it at length, Mark and I. He was surprisingly supportive, more than supportive actually. He seemed to see it as an opportunity for me, a spark that he hadn't seen in my eyes for a while. "You've always loved books, Sarah," he said one evening, as we sat on the porch swing. "And you're so good at understanding people, even the ones who aren't here anymore. Remember how you sorted through your grandmother's letters? You made sense of a whole lifetime." I did remember. It had been a poignant task, sifting through faded ink and brittle paper, piecing together a narrative of a life I'd only partly known. It had been both sad and profoundly rewarding. This felt similar, yet on a much grander scale, and for someone who was, essentially, a stranger. But this is different, Mark. This is Arthur Harrison, and it's his wife's most personal legacy. He wouldn't have asked if he didn't think you were the right person, Mark insisted. And he's right. You are. His faith in me was a comfort, a steadying hand. Perhaps he sensed that a part of me needed this challenge, this delve into something meaningful beyond our quiet domesticity. The biggest hurdle was my own self-doubt. Was I qualified? I wasn't a professional archivist or a literary scholar. I was just Sarah, a woman who loved to read and who, perhaps, had a reasonably empathetic nature. Could I do justice to Eleanor Harrison's memory, to her words? The responsibility felt immense that I decided to call Arthur. "Arthur," I began, my voice a little nervous when he answered. I've been thinking a lot about your offer, and I'd be honored to help you with Eleanor's library and her writings. There was a moment of silence on the other end, and then his voice, warm and noticeably relieved.
Sarah,
That's wonderful news. Truly wonderful. I can't tell you how much I appreciate this. I do have some questions, of course, I said. About the scope and how you envision this working. Of course, he replied. Why don't you come over next week? We can walk through the library, you can see the papers, and we can talk through everything. No pressure, no rush. We'll figure it out together. Together. That word again. It seemed to be a cornerstone of how Arthur was approaching this SO, the following Tuesday, a day usually reserved for my quiet solitude. I found myself driving back to Arthur Harrison's grand old house, not as a guest for dinner, but as someone embarking on a strange and delicate new venture. My heart was a mixture of trepidation and a curious, almost thrilling anticipation. Arthur greeted me at the door himself again, this time with an even warmer smile. Sarah, welcome. I'm so glad you're here. He looked a little less burdened than the last time I'd seen him, a subtle lightening around his eyes. He led me not to the sitting room, but down a hallway I hadn't noticed before, towards what I presumed was the library. Eleanor spent most of her days in here, he said softly, as he pushed open a heavy oak door. I stepped inside, and my breath caught in my throat. It wasn't just a room with books, it was a sanctuary. Floor-to-ceiling shelves, crammed with volumes of every imaginable size and color, lined 3 of the walls. 2 comfortable, slightly worn leather armchairs sat before a large fireplace, a small table between them holding a pair of reading glasses and a faded bookmark. Sunlight streamed in through a bay window that overlooked a beautiful, slightly wild garden, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air. The room smelled of old paper, leather, and faint, lingering perfume that I imagined was Eleanor's. It was, without a doubt, the most beautiful private library I had ever seen. It wasn't just a collection, it was a testament to a life lived in the company of stories. Oh, Arthur, I whispered, feeling a sense of reverence settle over me. It's magnificent. He smiled, a genuine, almost boyish smile that transformed his usually stern features. She loved it. It was her world. He gestured to a large antique desk in one corner. And this is where she wrote. The desk was clear except for a blotter, an inkwell, and a single, framed photograph of a younger Arthur, laughing, his arm around Eleanor. Piled beside the desk, however, were several large archival boxes. These, Arthur said, his voice becoming more serious, are her journals, her notebooks, manuscripts. Some typed, some handwritten. I haven't been able to bring myself to go through them yet. I opened one, once, and it was too soon. I nodded, understanding completely. This was the heart of it, the most personal, the most vulnerable part of Eleanor's legacy. The task, as I see it, Sarah, if you're still willing, he said, turning to me, is twofold. Firstly, the books themselves. Many are first editions, some are quite valuable, I believe. Eleanor had a rudimentary cataloging system, but it's idiosyncratic. I'd like to have a proper inventory, perhaps an appraisal for insurance, but more importantly, to understand the collection, its themes, its treasures. Maybe even identify some books that could be donated to a university or a specialist library if they're particularly rare and would be better preserved there. Eleanor always wanted her books to be used, to be read. He paused, then continued. And then there are her writings. He looked at the boxes with a mixture of love and pain. This is the more delicate part. I'd like you to read them, Sarah.
to tell me what's there.
Are they just personal ramblings? Are there stories that could be shared, perhaps with family, or even more widely? I simply don't know. I need someone with your sensitivity to navigate that. Someone I can trust to be honest, but also gentle with her memory and with mine. The scope was immense, far larger than I'd initially grasped. It wasn't just tidying up a few shelves. It was an immersion, a deep dive into a life. I'm not asking you to do this alone or quickly, Arthur added, as if sensing my thoughts. I'll provide any assistance you need. We can hire specialists for appraisals if necessary. The timeline is entirely up to you. Your comfort and your pace are paramount. I walked slowly around the room, running my fingers lightly over the spines of books, breathing in the unique atmosphere. There was a profound sense of peace here, but also an energy, the lingering presence of a vibrant mind. The idea of spending my days in this room, surrounded by Eleanor's cherished companions, her unspoken thoughts, felt less like a job and more like a calling. Arthur, I said, turning back to him, my voice firm now with resolve. I can do this. I want to do this. A wave of relief washed over his face. Thank you, Sarah. Thank you. He seemed to deflate a little, as if a great weight had been lifted from his shoulders. I've had this feeling, this intuition that you were the one. Eleanor had a way of guiding things, even now. We spent the rest of the morning talking details. He gave me a key to the house, insisting I come and go as I pleased. He showed me where the tea and coffee were kept, told me to make myself completely at home. He explained that he was often at his own office in a study upstairs or out for meetings, but he would be available if I needed anything. He emphasized again that this was my project, to shape as I saw fit. The trust he was placing in me was staggering and deeply humbling. As I drove away later, my car held a new sense of purpose. I wasn't just Sarah, Mark's wife, anymore. I was Sarah, the custodian of Eleanor Harrison's literary legacy. The title sounded grand, even a little absurd in my own head, but it carried a thrill. I thought about my quiet Tuesdays, now transformed. Instead of watering hydrangeas and tidying a silent house, I would be stepping into another woman's world, a world of words and dreams and untold stories. When I told Mark about the library, the boxes of journals, his eyes widened. Wow, Sal. That's really something. Are you okay with it all? It sounds like a lot. It is a lot, I admitted. But it's also wonderful, Mark. The room itself is incredible. And the idea of reading her thoughts, it feels like such a privilege. I paused, then added, Arthur seems like a different man when he talks about her, about this. So much softer. Mark nodded. He loved her very much. Losing her nearly broke him. I think this is his way of keeping her close and maybe, finally, starting to heal. And you're a part of that now. A part of his healing. A part of Eleanor's continuing story. It was a profound thought. The subtle tension I'd lived with for years, that quiet hum of unfulfilled potential, of wanting something more, without knowing what that something was, seemed to be receding. In its place was a burgeoning excitement, a sense of stepping onto a path that felt both unexpected and utterly right. The offer had been made, the offer had been accepted, and now, the journey was about to begin. I couldn't wait to open the first box. The first few weeks were an orientation, a gentle immersion. I decided to start with the library itself, to familiarize myself with Eleanor's taste, the landscape of her literary world, before delving into her most private writings. Arthur had been right. Her cataloging system was indeed idiosyncratic, more emotional than alphabetical. Books were grouped by feeling or by periods in her life when she'd read them, sometimes with little notes tucked inside their pages, a pressed flower, a theater ticket, a scribbled observation on a particular passage. It was like a treasure hunt, each discovery a small window into her soul. I'd spend hours in that sun-drenched room, the only sounds the rustle of pages, the occasional sigh of the old house settling around me, and the distant hum of the city. Sometimes, Arthur would appear silently in the doorway, a mug of tea in his hand for me. He rarely stayed long, just a quiet check-in, a brief, almost shy smile. "Finding anything interesting?" he'd ask. "Everything is interesting, Arthur." I'd reply, and it was true. From well-loved classics to obscure poetry collections, from travelogues to philosophical treatises, Eleanor's mind had clearly been a curious and expansive one. There were annotations in the margins of many books, her elegant script debating with the author, questioning ideas, or simply expressing delight. It was like having a silent conversation with her across time that I started creating a proper catalog, using a laptop Arthur had provided. It was meticulous work, sometimes tedious, but deeply satisfying. I learned about different editions, about the art of bookbinding, about the stories behind the stories. I discovered her fondness for female authors, many of whom I'd never encountered, and her passion for botanical illustration. The shelves held an incredible collection of richly illustrated floral encyclopedias. Mark noticed the change in me almost immediately. I was more animated in the evenings, eager to share little discoveries. "You're like a student again," he'd tease, but there was affection in his voice. A very happy student. And I was happy. There was a quiet joy in the work, a sense of purpose that filled my days. The subtle tension that used to underpin my quiet life had been replaced by a focused engagement. I was learning, I was contributing, I was connecting with something beautiful. One afternoon, as I was carefully examining a particularly old volume of poetry, Arthur came in and sat, for the first time, in the armchair opposite the one Eleanor must have favored. He didn't speak for a while, just watched me, the fire crackling softly beside us. Even though it was now early summer, the old house sometimes held a chill. "You handle them like she used to," he said finally, his voice quiet. "With such care. As if they're alive." I looked up, surprised by his observation. "They feel alive to me, Arthur. Full of her." He nodded slowly. "She always said that books have their own spirits, that they carry the echoes of everyone who has loved them." He paused then. Are you getting ready to look at her papers soon?" There was a note of apprehension in his voice, a vulnerability that was still so raw. I'd been deliberately holding back from the boxes of journals and manuscripts, wanting to understand the context of her reading life first. But I knew it was time. "I think so," I said gently. "I feel I know her a little better now, through her books. I think I'm ready if you are." He let out a long breath. "I am. I'm also terrified, if I'm honest. What if it's all just nonsense? What if there's nothing there worth preserving? And what if there is?" I countered softly. "What if there are stories only you can help bring to light? Eleanor trusted you with her life, Arthur. Surely, she trusted you with her words too." His eyes met mine, and I saw a flicker of the strength that had built his empire, now turned towards this deeply personal challenge. "You're right, Sarah. You're right." He stood up. "Whenever you're ready to start on those, just let me know. No pressure at all. But I'm here." The following Monday, I took a deep breath and pulled the first archival box towards me. The label, in Arthur's neat hand, simply read, "Eleanor's Journals Early Years." My heart beat a little faster. This felt like crossing a new threshold, from the public face of her library to the private chambers of her heart. I lifted the lid. Inside, nestled in tissue paper, were several cloth-bound notebooks, their pages filled with a graceful, looping script. I picked one up, its cover worn smooth with handling. The first entry was dated over 40 years ago, when Eleanor was a young woman, long before she met Arthur. As I began to read, I was drawn into her world, her youthful dreams, her observations about life, her early attempts at poetry and short stories. Her voice was vivid, intelligent, and often surprisingly witty. There were moments of joy, passages of lyrical beauty, and also expressions of doubt and insecurity that made her feel incredibly real and relatable. I found myself smiling, sometimes even laughing softly, and at other times, my eyes would mist over at a particularly poignant reflection. I wasn't just cataloging, I was witnessing a life unfold. I learned about her love for the Tuscan countryside, her passion for social justice, her complex relationship with her own mother. And slowly, I began to see the woman Arthur had loved so deeply, the woman whose spirit still filled this house. Days turned into weeks, and I moved from one box to another, from one era of Eleanor's life to the next. I read about her courtship with Arthur, the joy of their early marriage, the challenges they faced, her quiet pride in his achievements, and always, her unwavering love for him. There were unfinished novel manuscripts, collections of sharply observed character sketches, and poems that were so raw and beautiful they took my breath away. It wasn't always easy. There were entries detailing periods of sadness, of illness, of loss. Reading those felt like an intrusion, yet I also sensed that Eleanor, in writing them, had sought to understand, to process, to connect. Arthur had been right. She poured herself onto the page. Sometimes I would share small, carefully chosen snippets with Arthur. A funny observation she'd made, a beautiful description of their garden, a poem that echoed a sentiment he'd once expressed to me. Each time his reaction was profound. Sometimes he'd smile, a sad, sweet remembrance. Other times, his eyes would fill with tears, and he'd simply nod, unable to speak. These moments were creating a new kind of bond between us, a shared intimacy forged in the crucible of Eleanor's memory. We weren't just employer and helper. We were two people navigating a landscape of love and loss together, guided by the words of the woman who connected us. Mark, too, was part of this unfolding story. I'd recount some of the less intensely personal discoveries to him, and he listened with genuine interest. He saw how absorbed I was, how alive this work made me feel. "It's like you've found a missing piece of yourself, Sarah," he commented one evening. And he was right. I was discovering not just Eleanor, but also new facets of my own capability, my own emotional depth. The project was demanding, yes, but it was also filling a space within me I hadn't known was empty. The subtle tension between Mark and me, born of years of routine, was easing, replaced by a renewed sense of connection as he witnessed my transformation. He was proud of me, and his pride was a quiet gift. One late afternoon, I was reading a particularly powerful short story Eleanor had written, a tale about an older woman rediscovering her passion for art. It was so insightful, so beautifully crafted, that I felt a surge of conviction. This, and so much more of her writing, deserved to be read by others. I found Arthur in his upstairs study, looking over some architectural plans. "Arthur," I said, the journal still in my hand, "you need to read this. Not just this, but so much of what Eleanor wrote. It's truly remarkable." It's more than just personal ramblings. It's art. He looked up, his expression wary but hopeful. I handed him the journal, open to the story. He took it, his hand trembling slightly, and began to read. I watched as his face shifted, from apprehension to surprise, then to a profound, quiet awe. When he finally looked up, his eyes were shining. "She wrote this?" he whispered, as if he could hardly believe it. "My Eleanor?" "Yes," I said softly. "And there's so much more. She had a real gift, Arthur. A true voice." He stared at the pages, then at me, a new understanding dawning in his eyes. The weight of his grief seemed to lift, just a little, replaced by a burgeoning sense of wonder and pride. "What do we do, Sarah?" he asked, his voice filled with a new energy. "What do we do with all this beauty?" That question hung in the air, potent and full of promise. It was the moment, I think, when the true depth of the offer began to reveal itself. It wasn't just about sorting and cataloging. It was about resurrection. It was about giving Eleanor's voice the audience it deserved. And that realization, that shared mission, was about to take us on an even more unexpected journey, changing not just my life, but Arthur's and the way he remembered his beloved Eleanor forever. The personal discovery was no longer just mine. It was becoming his too, and the mutual respect between us deepened with every page turned. The decision of what to do with Eleanor's writings became our central focus. It was no longer just my task. It became a collaborative effort, a series of conversations filled with ideas, hopes, and a shared sense of excitement. Arthur, energized by the discovery of his wife's hidden literary talents, was like a man reborn. The quiet, almost melancholic figure I had first met was gradually being replaced by someone more engaged, more animated. His engineer's mind now focused on a new kind of project: how to build a legacy for Eleanor. We spent many afternoons in the library, which had truly become my second home, surrounded by Eleanor's books and her boxes of manuscripts, brainstorming. Should we try to get some of her poems or short stories published in literary magazines? Should we compile a small, privately printed volume for family and close friends? Or was there something more ambitious we could aim for? She always downplayed her writing, Arthur mused one day, sifting through a folder of meticulously typed poems. She'd call it her scribblings. If I'd truly understood the depth of it, I would have encouraged her more. I feel I failed her in that respect. "Arthur, you couldn't have known what she didn't fully share," I reassured him. "And she knew you loved her. That shines through in everything she wrote about you. This isn't about past regrets. It's about future possibilities. It's about honoring her now." My own confidence had grown immensely. Immersed in Eleanor's world, I had found a voice I didn't know I possessed. I was no longer just an admirer of literature. I was an active participant in its preservation and potential dissemination. I researched small presses, literary agents who specialized in posthumous works, and even explored the idea of creating a small foundation in Eleanor's name to support aspiring female writers. The vivid descriptions from her journals of her beloved Tuscany and her dream of one day having a small writing retreat there sparked an idea. "What if," I suggested tentatively one afternoon, "we considered publishing a collection of her best work, her poems, some short stories, perhaps excerpts from her journals that speak to her love of art and nature? And what if the proceeds from that book could go towards establishing a small writer's grant or a residency, perhaps even something connected to Italy, which she adored?" Arthur looked at me, his eyes wide. A book. Eleanor's book. The idea seemed to take his breath away. Then a slow smile spread across his face. Sarah, that's a wonderful thought. A way for her words to help others, just as she always helped people in her life. The energy this new goal created was incredible. We began the painstaking process of selecting the pieces that would best represent Eleanor's voice and talent.